Welcome to Sober Talk. I'm Dennis and I'm an alcoholic. Sober today thanks to Alcoholics Anonymous. If you or anyone you know is struggling with alcohol, please call Alcoholics Anonymous on 1300 222222 or visit their website at aa.org.au. I'll just run through the preamble of Alcoholics Anonymous. Alcoholics Anonymous is a fellowship of people who share their experience, strength, and hope with each other, that they may solve their common problems and help others to recover from alcoholism. The only requirement for membership is a desire to stop drinking. There are no dues or fees for a membership. We are self-supporting through our own contributions. It is not allied with any sect, denomination, politics, organization or institution. It does not wish to engage in any controversy, neither endorses or opposes any causes. Our primary purpose is to stay sober and help other alcoholics achieve sobriety.
Peter, I'm Arthur, I'm alcoholic, and April 1965, I was in the Adelaide Hospital, and Mary W., some of you know her, was one of the little nurses who had to scrape dirt off me. Not that I looked so dirty, but it was just that I didn't want to shower because I was, like always, I was afraid. I lived in fear and I was afraid of the water. And I remember he come to see me, a guy called Cheeky Charlie Hansen, and he didn't get such a warm welcome, you might say. When I bit him on the wrist, when he handed me the AA literature, and that sort of was this kind of mental condition I was in. Just like I had become like a beast actually, and but he got me to agree to go to another hospital, which I was happily. I did happily. I wanted to do that happily because there wasn't anywhere else to go. I didn't have any home. I had no room. I had nothing. I had a tiny little suitcase which was lying down in some cafe or club down in Hymby Street, and that was my worldly possessions. I wasn't always like that. I was an executive salesman for some of the biggest companies here, John Martin's and Car Cycle. But the rapidity of my decline, well, no one really noticed it, but on reflection, I see that it was just alcoholism took a real sharp turn for me at the age of 25. I went to this other hospital, and it was called Hillcrest Hospital. It was a mental hospital and was quite well known, not as notorious as Parkside, but it was bad enough. But it's a strange place to feel at home in a mental hospital. But I sort of felt at home there when I was introduced to this group of guys who were all alcoholics in this particular ward called Ward 2A. It was a revelation for me to know that there were other people like me. I mean, I didn't think there was anyone like me at all. And they were telling me, I didn't realize also that I had been certified. I didn't realize how sick I was. I was suffering with what's called cerebral palsy. I had lost my short-term memory, and the skin was rolling off my face through malnutrition. I was 6.5 stone, and I had to hang onto the wall to go anywhere. Everywhere I went, I staggered, and I had to hang onto the wall. My eye had sunk inside my head through the muscle being collapsed through the palsy. And, it was really the end for me. And in those days, alcoholism was only beginning to be accepted by the government. It was the Americans that told us that these people are not sick because they drink. They drink because they're sick, and that there is a predisposition to this vicious mental illness that we have. It's so subtle, so cunning, so powerful, and so baffling. And the one who suffers it most is the last person to actually see and to accept the condition itself. We're talking about young ladies, there were no young women in those days. Everybody looked shattered, the women and the men included. It was a bit hard to distinguish who was who sometimes. it really was the roughest of rough times, I can tell you. And but there I was in this hospital. I just didn't know why I was there. I was put in a corduroy suit, and I was left to myself. There were many men in corduroy suits. Most of the alcoholics were in ordinary sort of clothes, but I was put in this corduroy suit because they never thought I'd ever leave there. And all of the Korsakoffs who were there, they never left there either. They were alcoholics, some of them. The water had gone over the lip of the little basin that the brain sits in, and it's finished. You're finished. There's no recall. And that was the condition I was in 1965. However, I was given information regarding my alcoholism. I was told that 70% of alcoholics are neurotic. And, I heard things that from other members or other patients there that I had kept secret within myself. I kept a lot of secrets. I repressed a lot of truth. I didn't like who I was. I wanted to be someone different. And they were telling me that material, these inner realities that seemed to be exposed in my own mind and heart too early in life. I just didn't have the ability to cope with the dreadful fear that I suffered. And we had, I suppose, in some justification for the fear I had and repressed because, we had the German bombers flying across the skies and across our roofs, and they were dropping bombs on top of us, and that'll make you feel unwanted, I can assure you of that. And, my mother, she said to me, she says, there's something wrong with you. Well, she didn't have to really tell me, but she says, you are different from the rest. I says, well, yeah, that fitted, because I was brought up with all these beautiful young girls and guys, all my brothers, sisters, cousins, and all that, but I never felt at one with any of them. I never felt at one. I mean, I sort of mixed with them, but I was always searching for somewhere, that I might feel at home, I suppose. Was there an answer to the inner things that were going on in my life that I couldn't analyze? It's a lonely place, that, being neurotic and being full of fear and feel threatened perpetually. And when my father decided to give me a little bit of hot toddy, it was my first drink, hot toddy, good for the body. It's hot whiskey and sugar. That had such an impact on my mind. An indelible impression was put into my mind when I drank that hot toddy. All of the fears, all of the guilt, which I suffered, and had never done anything at all to merit the guilt that I felt, that all disappeared instantly when I had this alcohol. So it did make a marvelous impression on me. I was brought up in the Roman faith, the Roman Catholic traditional faith, and of course they tell us all about sin and hell and fire and all of that sort of thing. And I seem to also, again, unnaturally absorb these fears with this deep anxiety. I really didn't have a chance to make any kind of a, decision based on something with a true equilibrium. No balance. There was no balance, and so that was just I abandoned my faith eventually because of these fears, and joined the Royal Air Force. And I suppose that's was a bit of a diversion. Got into the Royal Air Force, did reasonably well in the firearms department. I was marksman there, and that's quite a high thing in the Royal Air Force. But everywhere I ever went, I was running away from my inner self, no matter what. The only relief I ever got was drinking. And the OCD nature of alcoholism, the obsessive compulsive disorder that tells you it tells you you don't have a problem, but it's there, and it was there for me. I couldn't see anything objectively. I was subject to all my feelings, and particularly my imagination. I wasn't the brightest of character, although I did get good marks. You have to be reasonably well educated to get into the Royal Air Force. But I never had any solid base. I was a person who constantly, not so much even in the beginning, but later on, needed approval. I really loved approval. An approval seeker, someone, what they call in modern psychology today, I had the deprivation syndrome, the need for affirmation, the perpetual need for affirmation. Until such time as that part of me, that deprivation syndrome, was sort of allayed by, you know, the people I was involved with, my little woman. She would support me, and I would support her, sort of thing, in my sober years right through. Anyway, I got into John Martin's here. I did quite well there until I decided to take some of the property that wasn't mine, and then they sent the police after me, and they put me into court. I lied my way out of court. I was living with a Bulgarian woman, and I was living a life that I never thought I'd live. This alcoholism just took me over. Because all the time I knew that I wasn't living right, and I wasn't doing the things I should do. But my affair with her soon ended when her boyfriend turned up from Adnabuka with a shoebox full of opals. So, and I got relegated to the back room, and that wasn't quite so good for me. But anyway, I met a Scotsman in the pub there in Adelaide, and he decided that perhaps I could sell motorbikes, and I thought I could. I remember going up to the Cornells and Perry Street. I had never ridden a motorbike in my life, and I told the boss I had. And, he says, well, here's the machine as an address, go and sell it. And I didn't know what to do. There was the machine standing there, and I had to get on it. I'd never been on it before. But I went around to the pub there and had 3 large brandies. Could have flown an airplane afterwards, and motorbike was nothing. And, so that wasn't the first, that was just one of the first humiliating things that I had to encounter. The second one was the woman. There was a woman there, and she could see, or she thought she could see, a future in me. She thought that, and I was living in half a room down there in North Street in the city. It was just a pig house. It was terrible. It was a whole room with a partition down the middle, and one guy had a bed in one side, and I had a bed on the other side. It was so small you couldn't fall on the floor. The bed took the whole floor up, and I used to slip in there at night. It was convenient. You could just drop into bed if you were drunk, and that was usually the case, I'd say this woman offered me a nice place down at Calendilla. I thought, well, I'll try it out. God, she wanted me to get married, and I thought, all right, fair enough. I didn't want to go back to the half a room, so I stayed with her and for about a few days, and then we got married, and it was the worst thing I ever done. She made 3 attempts in my life in 14 days, and I can remember one morning she came at me with a bread knife, a big, massive bread knife, and she's ready to push it into my head. She's screaming as well, and I'm standing there, and she stops all of a sudden, and she dropped the knife and she ran away. And it was just one of those times when I nearly got murdered or nearly got killed in Northern Ireland or something like that. There was always something looking after me. It seemed as if there was always some power around when the crisis became, deadly, sort of thing. I thought, of course, she's dropped a knife and must be my dynamic personality, sort of thing. We're just crazy. I was just mad, absolutely mad. It's pathetic even when I think of it. But anyway, that's how it was. And when you've got to go back to your place of employment, when you're working as an executive salesman, and you've just got married a fortnight before, and you go back and you have to tell everybody's asking how the honeymoon went. God, there was a story on that honeymoon, let me tell you. And I had to tell them it was all finished, and oh God, it was awful. It really was. Anyway, I went from bad to worse, as the saying goes. I was driven, and I finished up selling Japanese needles around the doors here in Adelaide. I sold millions of these needles, literally. And I used to buy them in Coles, big bundles of them, and sell them for 4 times what they were worth. Everybody thought they were getting a bargain, but anyway, that was how it was. And that's how I lived in the last 12 months of my drinking. I was eating off the pie cart. That's the way I sustained my body. My mother had told me when I was young that peas are good for your complexion. And there's me standing at the pie cart with no underwear on, thinking about my complexion and stuffing these peas into mine because I wanted it to look all right. No underwear on. Ah, yeah, that was a pair of thongs and a pair of check trousers I had on. It was awful. Walking up and down. And the new Australian people in Hindley Street, they just should just give me money. I think because they felt sorry for me. I think that might have been it. I sold a lot of needles, I must say, and but the fears were always there. I began to feel haunted, and then I began to feel worse than haunted. I began to feel haunted, as if there was a monkey on my back. You've heard that in AA, I suppose. This dreadful feeling, this desolation of something chasing you. That was how it was for me in the very end. It was awful. And, I was frightened in terror most of the time, and yet trying to look okay. Anyway, back to the hospital. I went into the alcoholic ward, and a man there, I had a guard looking after me because I could never find my way back where I was going. Horsebreaker Steve was there. Some of you remember him. And of course, Chica Charlie was there all the time. And, they asked me to put up the steps, the AA 12 steps, in the big room there at Hillcrest. So, the big recreation room. So I put up these steps. They were massive steps. So, I think they're up at Salisbury now. That's 60 years ago, and they're still there. But they're up at Salisbury there now. And we put them onto the wall, and I sat back to see if they were straight, if everything was straight, because I'm like that. I'm a perfectionist, and I like everything straight. I've got a beautiful house these days, and I've got 40 pictures on the walls, perhaps. They're all straight because I checked them, I've got all these pictures all straight, but I looked at the steps, and I was on my own. There was nobody there in this big, massive hall, and I saw it was suggesting to turn my will and my life over to the care of God. I couldn't believe it. I thought, what sort of religion is this? It wasn't Catholic religion. It wasn't Hinduism. They were saying, give everything to God. And I thought, I wonder if that would work. And intuitively, all of my life, I really did feel as if I needed to do something just like that. Give everything to the higher power. And I did that Friday afternoon. They sent me into, I got a day out, and I came back, trial leave type of thing. And on the Sunday morning, the people came up from St. Monica's Church, and they took me down to Mass. The priest had been there on the Saturday. I went to my confession, which Roman Catholics do, and then I went to this St. Monica's church at Hillcrest there. It's still there, of course. I was to later find out that St. Monica was the mother of St. Augustine, and that St. Monica was indeed an alcoholic. She used to go down to the cellar to bring up the wine and couldn't make it back up the stairs afterwards. She couldn't. That was said, St. Monica had to be taken to North Africa by St. Augustine, but that's another story. Anyway, I came back from St. Monica's, walking across, and there was something strange. There was something pending. I could feel it. Walking across the lawn there. I went into the ward, gave the clothes that I had borrowed to the man who lent to me them. I sat down at the card table there at Hillcrest, and it was there, this power that I've come to know and love in the last 60 years. This power poured into my life in what we know in AA as a spiritual experience. And truly, I described as the indescribable ecstasy. This power came into my life that Sunday morning in April 1965, and I haven't had a drink since that day. God did for me what I couldn't do for myself. The insatiable craving that I knew even as a little boy, that craving for alcohol, was lifted out of me, a root and branch. It's never come back to this day. I've never had the temerity to take any credit for staying sober either. I was to learn that the problem for alcoholics centers in the mind. I was told that we have a physical allergy coupled by a mental obsession arising out of an emotional compulsion. We don't have the disease. It has us. We are truly powerless over the actual center, the problem in the mind. And I was lucky. When I say lucky, it was providential that I was with the people who knew all about this spiritual experience. The doctor in charge of the hospital, Dr. Robert, in the ward, Dr. Robertson, he had a similar, if not identical, perhaps, same spiritual experience. And, I was really transformed, transported. They took me down into death row, and I spent a week in death row in a situation that I have never, ever been truly able to trying to think of the word describe. It was a mystical experience of the highest order, and it changed my life totally and completely over the years that I have been with you people. You people accepted me before I could accept myself. All of what was wrong with me was still with me then, but it was all buried. I had to see and accept and see all of these different things within myself over the years that God has been in control of my life. We have a complete psychic change in AA. I'm not the same person who drank. I'm not the same person who was before I drank. We have a complete psychic change. The book tells us that. That has been the case for me. If you fall into the hands of the living God, then it would be best you prepare yourself for future conflict. I've had conflict after conflict. I thought I was going to have a completely peaceful, wonderful, problem-free life. But there's not such a thing. If you live a spiritual life, you get trouble. God doesn't leave you in peace. I can assure you of that. He's never let me in peace. I've had peace. I've had utter security. I know it. I never take anything for granted. You get almost flattered by the way God looks after you. Made me feel anyway, as if I was the only one in the world that mattered to him. And that's the love. That's not just love, that's divine love. And that's what you can sense when this higher power takes control of everything. I met a little woman in AA. I met her up at North Adelaide. I looked at her, and it wasn't a rehab romance or anything like that. I looked at her, and she looked at me, and we knew we were meant for each other. That was it. We just knew. Well, we never got married, but we stayed engaged for 46 years. And that in itself was proof enough. And we lived apart for 46 years, except for the little period there when I gave her a room at a place that I always had. But, and she came to Adelaide. But I found, she said, I said to her one day that after some years, I said, look, I don't think I love you anymore. This is the sort of thing unmanly men say to women. But I said to her, I don't think I love you anymore. She says, oh, that's interesting. And she stood there. She was very pretty and very prim and proper, She says, you don't love me anymore. I says, nah. She says, you mean you don't have that nice, happy, emotional glow about me? I says, yeah. She says, I don't want that rubbish. She says, I want commitment. I thought, commitment? How do you spell that? For God's sake. But I was man enough to know that she was usually always right. Everything I did, she got me out of heaps of trouble because she was an intellectual. And I got into one or two troubles, not bad troubles, criminal trouble, nothing like that. But she was always there to help me. She was always there to point out where and when I should act. And I buried her about 12 to 14 years ago. And, I think there's another day gone past that I haven't thought about her. Not a day. Eddie's sitting there. I'm not saying Eddie was on the wrong track, but Eddie got pushed onto the right track, I'll put it that way. But this little woman, little tiny Australian woman, and she loved Eddie, and thank God she loved me. I'm a happy man today. I've got all of the material things I need. I live in a beautiful old bluestone cottage. I've got all what the old English like, big Chippendale chairs and all of that sort of stuff. I don't look for approval. I just be myself. I always try to make people like me. I don't do that now. If you don't like me, tough. I don't like me. So, so you're not the first in the line. All right, that'll do me.
AA has more than 2 million recovering alcoholics throughout the world. In Australia, there are about 18,000 members. They meet in over 2,000 local meetings spread around the country. Meetings range in size from a handful in some areas to hundreds or more in larger communities. And once again, if anyone you know is struggling with alcohol issues, please call Alcoholics Anonymous in 1300 222222 or visit their website on aa.org.au.